I'm using an easel. I try to get my paper set up to where might be a little too high. Yeah, it's a little too high. Try to get my paper set up to where I can look at my eye line and literally draw that across my paper, right? That way, when I'm looking from here to here, I can see that relationship easily. I actually think this might work out okay. Okay, so it's kind of a long demo, but I can speed it up. So you're gonna want your skewer, you're gonna want some B pencils, you're definitely gonna wanna have an eraser, right? So set yourself up like you have before, being mindful of your handedness, right? So for me, I'm making sure that I can see from the left so that I can draw here and have that simultaneous work happening, right? So there's no horizon line in here. We're not using a horizon line. Doesn't even make sense to. So we're actually thinking about our eye line as the horizon line, and so you're just gonna outstretch your arm like this, and it's gonna go right along with what you're looking at. And you kind of wanna memorize what that looks like, because we're not going to be doing this in a very synthetic manner like we've done in the past, where you had a piece of paper, you drew a line, you had a perspective point, we followed all the rules, and it looked okay. So I'm going to close one eye and kind of do this. And what I'm kind of memorizing again is, where does that pass through? And for me, it's passing through like literally where it says electrical closet, and it cuts through about the bottom third of that piece of work on the back wall. When you select your perspective, make sure that the feet of your easel are perfectly parallel with that back wall that you're going to draw. Otherwise, it's not 1 point technically, right? If you're at an angle like this, you're actually dealing with 2 point, because you don't have a shape coming straight at you and then receding away, or vice versa. So what I'm going to do is just kind of create a really simple and light, like super duper light, kind of mark for myself there. So that's going to be my point of my eye line reference happening. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide, what is that back wall shape? When I measured this last week, and I've drawn this wall like 3 times now, I've discovered that it is, and I'm going to pencil set it again just to make sure. I've discovered that it's actually, I think it's wider or it's taller. One of the two. It's a rectangle. Yeah, it's a little bit wider than it is tall, so it's not a square, right? So it's going to be a rectangle, and it's going to be like a little bit skewed. So it's important to set yourself up for success with this, so that you can create that deep space scenario. When we looked at those other drawings in the classroom, that back wall, or whatever that was, like that they selected, whether it was windows, it was a wall, whatever, okay, they made it pretty small, okay? With the size of paper, we've got to make sure it's pretty small. And then we'll use basic units of measure to make everything else look correct as it comes out. Because we have a limitation here that means we can't like just draw everything that we can see, so we kind of have to frame it in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to draw like a plumb line that kind of goes through the middle. And I'm going to try to get that perfectly in the center here. So at that point then, I'm going to go ahead and decide how large this thing has to be. So when I measure from edge to edge and I go up, edge to edge, up. Okay, yeah. So again, it's a little wider. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a very small rectangle for myself. And I'm going to set that up such that it's small enough that I have plenty of space to come out from there, okay? The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out where my basic unit of measure is going to go. And I like to use that painting, drawing, print, whatever it is back there, because it like works with a lot of other things, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go corner to corner. If you remember when we talked about this last week, that helps us find the center of things. So if I go corner to corner here, and I sort of observe what that middle would be, and I'm closing one eye as I do that. And for me, I have to go from like where the ceiling meets the wall to the borders that are being cropped in by this natural wood and this I-beam to where the baseboard exists. And so going corner to corner there shows me that this thing's off just a little bit to the right. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna kind of like eyeball that. I know that it's a little higher from the middle. But now I'm gonna make sure that it's the right size. So I'm gonna measure the width of this, and then I'm gonna see how many of those I can get into that back wall. And it looks like the width of this ought to be 2 of this back wall. So it looks like I need to make that just a little bit longer as such. So I'm making that modification now. Now I'm gonna go vertically. I'm gonna measure that pencil sighting. 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 1/4 there. So I literally should be able to get 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've made it a little tall. So I'm actually just gonna take a little bit of this off of that. So it's like a little bit more rectangular as such, right? And now I'm not worried about detail at this point. I just wanna get everything blocked in. Okay, so the next thing that I'm ready for, and I don't like to keep these things, some people do. Maybe you want to edit this later, it's up to you. It helps me to see what I'm doing when I don't have those things. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna find the pitch of this wall coming toward me, okay? So what I'm going from here, and again, if you can't see this because you're, blocked off somehow, you wanna get to where you can. I'm trying to figure out what this is gonna look like as it comes toward me. So this area, basically where this baseboard meets this I-beam, then I wanna figure out how long into space it's gonna go. So I like to start on the bottom. That's just how I work best. So I'm going to line up my skewer with that exact pitch. And then I'm going to bring my body straight over here like this and not move anything. And as I'm doing that, I'm memorizing what that looks like on my paper. And then I'm gonna check it for accuracy. So I'm gonna line that up, I'm gonna move over and take a look. And I actually can line that up pretty perfectly, okay? So that's why you wanna make a quick slash on there very fast. Don't give your brain a chance to forget it. Now I do the top. So the top, I'm gonna angle this. And what I'm going for is kind of that difference in value up there. Like they painted like a fake border. I don't know if you can see that, but they made it like dark gray up there to make it look like it kind of was the same thing as this I-beam over here. So I'm going off of that because it's easy to see. I always double check just to make sure, and that looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm gonna decide how far into space this thing needs to be, right? If we were looking straight at this, it would be a rectangle, but as we move away, it changes into a strange parallelogram that's bigger here, smaller back here. So what I like to use are latitude lines. So thinking about lines that could be drawn across the floor, like if there were tiles everywhere, right? Those can help us as a point of reference, kind of like a grid can help us when we're analyzing complex shapes. So this is a really handy situation right here where the seam is, right? So I can look at that, I can look at this one right here, and I can measure that to figure out how deep into space those should be. So the first one is it's pretty easy. Because I can measure kind of roughly from where the front of that I-beam is to where it meets that natural wood panel there. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my basic unit of measure once again. I'm gonna go from top to bottom. Okay, it's too big. So maybe I'll measure that. So now I'm measuring from where that latitude line should exist to where it meets the baseboard. I'm gonna come up and compare that with my basic unit of measure, and it's roughly half. Okay, so the distance that I see between the wall and where that I-beam exists, about half of this. So I'm gonna look at this, I'm gonna say, okay, well, it should probably exist about right here. So that helps me determine where that I-beam goes. The I-beam sticks out a little bit. I'm not going to worry about that right now in terms of like how wide that is, because it's going to go straight up. Because in the scheme of things, it probably won't matter so much. I just want to make sure that it matches with whatever image that I'm taking from that edge. I'm going to go ahead and move that out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out how much of that space in between these two latitude lines would be. So I'm just going to go back and measure. I think I'm going to go I'm going to go with the sideways, the horizontal on my basic unit of measure for that piece. And when I do that, I see that it almost perfectly sideways matches up with about how far that latitude line is between where that one should drop, right? So that's why it's important to close one eye, you're flattening space. So I decided this to about this. Otherwise it's guesswork, right? So that's about roughly where that line would exist as it comes across. So what I'm going to do now is bring this straight up, because again, with 1 point perspective, we know that we can deal with, that doesn't look very straight. I'll have to fix that later. We know that we can use parallels to describe a lot of things because we're faced against that wall pretty well. So we don't have to guess where that's going to go. We just don't go straight up, right? The one thing that is going to happen, though, is that we're going to define this wall over here. So now I can go straight across from here and extend that latitude line this way. Because I defined this up here, right, how that pitch comes toward us, I have a really convenient and easy place that I can drop this in straight across. Now I've got that wall worked out, right? I'm not going to do the whole drawing, okay? I want to give you plenty of time to do this, but I am going to show you at least how I can start to extrapolate and connect the complexity of this stuff happening here with how we can draw this stuff over here and where am I going to end, right? So now I've got this corner. So a good thing for me to look at now would be that trash can. And so I'm going to take my basic unit of measure again. I'm going to go from side to side, and I'm going to look at how much of that or how many of those I could get into this piece, or this trash can from this piece. So trash art, I guess, huh? That's about 1 3/4 roughly. So it does come out from the wall a little bit, and I need to probably figure out how far that's going to go. So I'm going to measure this again top, and that's a perfect one. So this is the same amount of space here as how far that exists from the wall. Now I just look at the pitch of the bottom, memorize that, and I've got a pretty good point of measure happening there. What did I say, 1 3/4 of those? So like if I come up here and I go 1 here, it's going to be about that tall, roughly. So now I didn't measure that depth back there, which is probably something I should do. I'm just going to eyeball that because I know that the side of that doesn't show very much of it to me. So that's going to be a pretty oblique angle. But it's below my eye line, so I'm not going to, I will see the top of it. That's a thing. So if we did have a vanishing point, it would go back to our vanishing point, right? Unless it was off just a little bit. So now I'm going to go ahead and come across the front. I'm going to decide how wide that thing is, so I'm going to measure that. It's about the same width as this. So that's the first thing I do when I'm in an environment, is I decide my basic unit of measure, and I start looking at whatever that is and how I can relate that to other things, right? Because if it's not going to work for you to use that thing, you're not going to use that thing. You're going to find a different thing that works for you. So we've been drawing boxes, so this should go fairly quickly. I know this is flat straight up against, right? I can look at this other pitch that's happening back here, but I also know that this should be some kind of a vanishing point, right? So I could do this, or I could do this, and I could drop it over and get a good feel for it. I'm just going to use the quicker method and make sure it looks like what I'm drawing. Okay. So it appears that within my frame of reference, I should probably be able to get one of these chairs, if not both of them. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to figure out how I'm going to measure that trash can since I already have it here. And then I'm going to see, like, from that corner, how many of those I can get on. So if I have two of these heights here, check that one more time. That gets, like when I measured this, and then I compared it against this wall back here, it kind of floated over this area here. So I know I'm going to see that chair. Probably all of it, right? So that kind of helps me give a good point of reference. And since I didn't get all the way through, I'm just going to make a little hash mark over here. That way I kind of know that that's roughly where that's going to exist. To make sure my proportions are correct, I'm going to measure that chair against my new basic unit of measure. And it kind of looks like it's about that wide. So they don't touch from my perspective, they might from yours. But now I'm going to worry about using a cylinder. So using some of that more advanced perspective stuff. Now the bottom of that, let's see, if I were to draw a latitude line across here, from here through here, the bottom of this actually comes forward even more. So right as things get closer and closer to you, those lines are coming out and they're marking. So you kind of want to pay attention to those things. So I'm just going to kind of use my structure that I've developed here to get me a good start for that chair. Since they are mostly cylindrical, I'll perfect that later when I look from my photograph that I created. And I actually see this other cylinder back here, but it's being overlapped by another chair. Again, kind of an issue that I'll have to deal with later, right? So I think the last thing I'm going to do before I turn you loose here is figure out how far away to that corner am I going to get that in my perspective. I think I am. So I'll take a look. I think what I'm going to go for is the width of that wall back there. So I'm going to measure it again on the baseboard. Then I'm just going to bring it forward and drop it on that corner. And that doesn't quite work. So I'm going to try the height. See if that helps me. That doesn't work either. So, how many trash cans then, right? 1, 2, about 2.5 trash cans from that corner. So, height, 1, 2, and about a half. So I would say that that corner is going to exist roughly over here. So that's going to be the beginning of the windows, right? Now to figure out the pitch of that, all I've got to do is hold this out here, bring it over here, and that shows me I'm not going to be drawing very much of it, right? Now again, I could look at this, like what's the relationship here? And if you did figure out where a vanishing point is, that can help you. Again, I don't worry so much about that because the world isn't that neat and clean. Okay, that's a pretty good start, right? You would consider your drawing completed if you had everything mapped out in front of you pretty well. And then what I want you to do is take your easel down, take a photograph right in front of where your perspective is so that your photograph looks like what you've laid out. And then once everything's cleaned up, or rather mapped out, we take it into the classroom and we perfect things and then we shade, right? Cool? Okay.